When it comes to talking about Tears of the Kingdom, a common question that comes up is, are dungeons returning? And most of the time when people are talking about dungeons returning, they don't mean like in Breath of the Wild with all the shrines and the divine beasts. They mean something more like previous games where these dungeons had more of a unique theme and story behind it, and they would have a mini boss that was also unique to it, and when you would beat the boss, you would get a unique item that offered up new gameplay possibilities that gave you ways to solve puzzles you couldn't solve before, and the entire dungeon would come to a climactic end with a final epic boss fight. What we saw in Breath of the Wild was a little bit more repetitive, not as unique themes or stories or boss fights, still with a myriad of amazing and fun gameplay possibilities, but definitely different from what we saw before. And a lot of Zelda fans missed this. So then, are dungeons returning? Or will we see more of the shrines and divine beasts in Tears of the Kingdom? Or could it perhaps be something else altogether? Well, that's what we're talking about today. Welcome everyone, this is On This Restart, and before we jump into talking about how dungeons are going to work in Tears of the Kingdom, first let me just point out that there was this recent leak from the art book of the collector's edition for Tears of the Kingdom. We will not be discussing those images in this video. That said, I also don't think they make much of a difference for what we'll be discussing today with the dungeons. We'll be going over the recent trailer, the past trailers, some rumors and reports that have come out, how they've handled things from previous Zelda games, and piecing it all together and coming up with what I believe is a pretty solid theory as to how dungeons will be working in Tears of the Kingdom. So with that all said, let's talk about the direction they may be headed in for Tears of the Kingdom. So, Breath of the Wild, huge massive game from Nintendo. But there were a lot of ideas they had left over, a lot of DLC ideas that they wanted to implement, and with all these extra ideas, they decided to build a sequel off of that. And when you take a look at Breath of the Wild, there is a lot there, but also a lot of it is arguably a little repetitive. There could have been more variety. The shrines were very similar, the divine beasts were very similar, the bosses were very similar, the enemy designs were not too varied. And I think this in part has to do with how massive the game is, how much they were trying to do. They had to limit some of the other things they were trying to do to get as much out there. But with this sequel building upon Breath of the Wild as a base, and considering all the ideas they wanted to implement, I think it's pretty reasonable to expect that the variety and the amount of ideas in this game are going to dwarf what we saw in Breath of the Wild. So the common criticism of how repetitive the shrines and divine beasts kind of felt, well, that's less likely to be the case with whatever they do in Tears of the Kingdom. But also considering how reactive the Zelda team has been with different Zelda games, I also think there's reason to think they'll be changing things around this time as well. So, for example, with Skyward Sword, one of the biggest criticisms of the game was the linearity. So what did they do? They went ahead and made the most open Zelda game ever. So it's definitely likely they'll be taking a look at some criticisms of Breath of the Wild and trying to improve upon them. And this may include revisiting some common Zelda tropes. We've seen already evidence that they were revisiting a lot of common Zelda tropes. It looks like they've brought back more of a humanoid Ganondorf with a personality, hence the voice lines we heard from the trailer. We're seeing the return of some common Zelda enemies such as the Re-Dead, and it even seems like there's this major quest to restore the Master Sword, and possibly even collecting 7 major tiers, which might not be too different from collecting like, say, 6 medallions or 7 Triforce pieces. So we are seeing signs of Tears of the Kingdom that more Zelda tropes are returning. So with these Zelda tropes returning, perhaps we could see more, maybe like the classic style dungeons. But something else we need to keep in mind here, Breath of the Wild was all about being very different and trying out a whole bunch of new ideas and not being afraid to ignore some pre-Zelda tropes. Tears of the Kingdom may not have that same direction as we're seeing with some of these returning tropes, but also they're going to want to retain what made Breath of the Wild so successful, that open air style. So I don't think we should expect the exact same structure of how dungeons were handled for previous Zelda games either. But I do think we could see something that's a little in between. And that brings me to a rumor that's coming from friend of the channel, Mike Odyssey. So Mike Odyssey put out a video a few days ago where someone that he trusts told him some additional details about what we saw with the most recent trailer. And specifically when it comes to dungeons, these were the takeaways. The kinds of dungeons we will see in Tears of the Kingdom will feel more like traditional dungeons. Many of them will be in the sky. Now, it's not specified if these traditional dungeons are like the shrine replacements, or if they are actually like big, giant, major dungeons. However, it is also said that there will be actual boss fights to end a lot of these dungeons. And when we take a look at the most recent footage, we do see a sky island that has that giant block-looking golem creature. And when we take a closer look at this creature, you can see that that green energy is coursing through it. And we've actually seen this before. In one of the earlier trailers, we did see another type of enemy in the sky that also had this kind of energy coursing through it. What this is suggesting, in my opinion, is that these enemies share a common creator. These enemies aren't organic creatures, they are something more robotic or golem-like. It's not too different from the Guardian battles we saw in the shrines in Breath of the Wild, or even like some of the fights we saw in the Tower of the Gods in The Wind Waker. The idea being that there's this ancient civilization that has these challenges to test the hero Link. And I don't think many are going to disagree that clearly that all these Sky Islands are based off some ancient civilization. Now, it is speculated that this is all related to the Zonai. There's this common motif of green that all seems to be closely related. We did talk about this in detail with a previous video, so after this one, if you want to check that out, I'll have it at the end screen. But yes, it does look like there will be some sort of challenges in the sky. I think that much is pretty clear. In the footage, we see actual dungeon-style puzzles being done in the sky, and these are all on the outside. They are not inside some sort of building. That said, we have seen quite a few buildings and structures in the sky, and some of these could very well be some sort of type of dungeon. Taking a look at the footage and photos we've gotten, we've seen multiple angles of that giant tower. We see this giant round object in the sky, almost like a moon. We've seen the Lome labyrinths risen up from the ground. They've likely been changed in some way. There's a lot of large, unique structures in the sky. And I don't think they're there just for show. I think most likely we will be able to enter them and they will have certain puzzles and challenges. So definitely there's going to be some sort of dungeon-like experience in the sky. But I really doubt it's just going to be left to the sky. I think we actually see evidence that it goes well beyond that. Just thinking about it here for a moment, why would they just have shrines and challenges in the sky? Why wouldn't there be changes to the surface and changes to down below as well? We've seen evidence that we will be exploring underground Hyrule too. So with that all in mind, I want to point something out to you here. With this particular shot, notice these wispy, smoky lines that are connecting these islands to down below. We don't see where they go, but I think I know where they actually connect to. I think they connect to down below. So we've seen these pockets of malice, and most recent theories have suggested that these malice pockets are potentially holes. Shoutouts to both Zeltic and Monster Maze who've put out some videos about this. And it makes sense for there to be these malice holes. We've seen malice erupting from Death Mountain, we've seen malice erupting from underground Hyrule Castle. It seems like the malice is coming from down below. And if we're seeing these pockets of malice all throughout Hyrule, and we're seeing these giant, long, smoky lines connecting to the sky, I think there may be some sort of connection here. We've seen parts of these ruins in the sky coming down below, and we've seen Link bring parts of these ruins from the surface to above. But also we have evidence that these types of ruins are even underground Hyrule as well. With the very first teaser, we see a lot of that dragon symbolism, and we've seen that same dragon symbolism in the sky. Arguably the same type of ruins from the same type of civilization. So if we're seeing the ruins coming down below and we're seeing Link bring some of these ruins back up, why can't they go down below as well? What if these shrine or dungeon challenges are more than just things in the sky, but they are connecting you to the surface and down below? And a big part of the game is building up these connections throughout. To me, this kind of makes a bit more sense because as we progress in the game, there will be a change. If you can just fly to any sky, that's one thing, but if part of the challenge is getting to the sky, but also establishing a connection from what's in the sky to down below, there's something you're building up there. And we actually do have a bit more evidence that there are shrine-like challenges or dungeon-like challenges below Hyrule. So we have this one shot where Link is running from a Hinox in a cave. The cave is clearly underground because we can see roots coming from the ceiling. And this Hinox has a weird green glowy-like jewel around it. And this green energy has been a common motif for these ruins, potentially Zonai ruins. And when we consider the puzzles we saw in Breath of the Wild, which were shrine challenges that had these special like balls that were in these big necklaces for the Hinox, this shot here may be showing evidence of a similar like challenge, but instead of it being Sheikah shrines, they are Zonai shrines, and this green jewel is a part of some sort of puzzle for that down below. So I really think what we're seeing evidence of are challenges that are below the surface and the sky, and a big part of the game is connecting all of these. And I think there's actually more evidence to this. So we've seen these spiral-like structures all throughout the surface already, but I actually believe we have proof that they're also in the sky and below as well, further strengthening my argument here that a big part of these challenges is about building up these connections. So when we take a look at this piece of art for Tears of the Kingdom, there's this one part to the very left on this island that is obscured by clouds, so you can't see it totally clear, but you'll see there's a bit of a different color there. Looks kind of like a glowy-like stone with a spiral around it. Not too different from the glowy-like stones with spirals around that we've seen on the surface. But also, we have something kind of similar that we've seen with the very first teaser as well. And this is below Hyrule, the subterranean. In the room with what we assume is Mummy Ganondorf, there is the green hand, but from the green hand, we see this giant spiral, very similar. But this spiral is connecting to this upside down pyramid. And I've brought this theory up in multiple videos already, but there may be something to connecting these green spirals to these upside down pyramids, and we see something like that with a lot of the items we've seen to the sky. There's some sort of point or spire to all of them. So currently my speculation is that there's going to be a lot of shrine-like challenges where you are building up connections from the sky to the surface and down below. There are all types of challenges hidden throughout Hyrule. But here I'm talking about a different type of shrine, where we're seeing challenges that are not just housed inside an environment, but are actually within the Sky Islands themselves, out on the outside. That there are a lot of these giant unique structures where we'll likely be able to go inside of them, and there seems to be this idea where we're going to be building up connections from down below the surface in the sky, and what this is going to create is a lot more variety with the types of challenges we'll see. Probably not as repetitive as we saw with the shrines. While I did enjoy them, there's going to be more variety and more exploration with what we're seeing here. And going back to the rumor from what we've seen of the footage of the boss fights, some of them may have boss fights at the end still, which would be pretty cool. But as much as I think I'm going to enjoy this evolution of the shrine idea, I still think there's going to be something even bigger. I do think there's this idea that the scale in this game is even bigger. I mean, quite literally, we are going far higher up than we ever could in Breath of the Wild. As high as we've seen Link can get in the footage, we still see islands going far beyond what we can see. And then we've seen all the evidence of going far down below as well, so the verticality here is significantly greater than we saw in Breath of the Wild, and that alone suggests far more scale here. But it goes beyond just the exploration, but also the enemies. There were some bosses that were kind of big in Breath of the Wild, but we're already seeing enemies that are even larger. This giant golem in the sky, that's a lot bigger than most of the bosses we saw in Breath of the Wild. But also, take a look at the shot here on this bridge. There's a giant three-headed dragon. A lot of us think that this is some new version of Gleeok from the original Legend of Zelda. But this bridge in Breath of the Wild is a very large bridge, and from what we can see, this Gleeok barely fits on there. It is huge. So we're seeing larger environments, larger structures, larger enemies. And I think this will also extend to larger main dungeons as well. So, the Divine Beasts, my biggest problem with them was that while themselves were quite large, the actual experience of the dungeon, I felt was a bit lesser than what we saw from previous Dungeons and Zelda games. Once you understand the primary gimmick behind the puzzles, all 4 Divine Beasts can be finished very quickly, and the overall themes, atmosphere, and final bosses feel very similar. But considering what we're expecting for Tears of the Kingdom, how there's going to be a lot more variety, so the dungeons likely will stand out a bit from each other, and there's more skill, so they will be a bit larger, and also hopefully more unique bosses, I think things are boding well for larger scale dungeons too. And I do think we've seen some evidence of this. We did get that footage where Link took out the Master Sword and it was glowing. He was on a sky island next to this yellow light. It seemed like the indication was that they were doing something special with the Master Sword. And considering that the Master Sword is broken, and considering that the logo has like a green-like energy blade attached to the Master Sword or being a part of the Master Sword, I don't think it would be a stretch to think that there may be some sort of effort to restore or power up the sword, similar to previous Zelda games. And considering we're seeing a lot of returning tropes, there may be a grand quest to do so. And in previous Zelda games, when we have been reforging or powering up the Master Sword, this has been done through temples or major dungeons. And oftentimes, these major dungeons have had some sort of sage. Now, when we take a look at the trailer where we got the title reveal, the beginning parts show this interesting character that I refer to as the Bunny Zonai. And above the character there are 7 round objects that look maybe like tears. But in the special collector's edition trailer, we see a more expanded view of this shot, and we actually see 6 characters below. Historically, previous Zelda games have had 7 sages. So maybe there's a hint here that there will be 7 sages for 7 main dungeons or temples that will have 7 tiers or something like it that will be used to power up the Master Sword, reforge it, make it stronger than before, so Link can take on this stronger version of Ganondorf. From what Zelda has said, it seems like it's gonna take a little bit more this time than before.
But Link, I am not sure you'll be able to stop him.
Now, where would these temples or dungeons be? Well, they would be likely related to the different races, because each sage is usually represented by a particular race. Considering that there may be dungeons related to particular races and areas of the map, we do have some hints for some already. So we've seen in the Hebrew region where the Rito are, above the giant Hebrew mountain with the hole in it, there is this giant vortex. We can't see what's in there, but there's something special going on there. And then there's also Death Mountain with malice erupting from it. If there's something in there, it wouldn't be the first time we saw a major dungeon hidden inside Death Mountain. It's actually happened several times. So I do think we're seeing both story hints and hints with the footage of major style dungeons returning. Now, I don't think these dungeons will operate the exact same way as previous Zelda games. Like, maybe there won't be a specific item that you get in each dungeon because of the more open style Tears of the Kingdom, but there will likely still be some sort of power up. And considering everything we've discussed so far, how the scale of this game is larger, how there may be more variety, and we're seeing indications of major boss fights at the end, if these major dungeons are grander than all the shrine-like challenges in this game, have more variety and a more unique theme with a nice narrative to it, with a cool power-up, and a major unique boss fight at the end, that's all I would really want for a modern-style dungeon in Tears of the Kingdom. So considering that and this possibility that there may be a lot of unique style shrines that will be handled in various unique ways with the Sky Islands and connecting to the surface and below the surface of Hyrule as well, I think there's a lot of potential for unique gameplay possibilities here that will be epic and more grand and varied, and that's really exciting, and that's my take of how dungeons will return and work in Tears of the Kingdom from what we know so far. But what do you guys think? Let me know in the comments below. Anyways everyone, this is Andres Restart. Thank you so much for listening and watching. I'll see you all really soon. Take care.